November, 1882. In the cellar of 219 Madison Avenue, a coal-fired steam engine throbs through the evening hours. Its rhythm is constant, mechanical, hungry. Every few minutes, a worker shovels more coal into the boiler's red throat. The flames roar, water boils, steam pressure builds, the pistons drive, and 30 feet above, in the Romanesque dining room with its 12-foot stained glass skylight, 385 electric lights cast a soft, incandescent glow across the faces of men playing cards. They are not thinking about the cellar. They are not thinking about the engineer whose name has been lost to history, who has been monitoring pressures and temperatures since sunset. They are certainly not thinking about the fact that his shift ends at 11 o'clock. The clock in the hall chimes 11. The engineer, his work complete, shuts down the generators. Company policy, his job was daylight to 11, nothing more. He leaves through the service entrance, walks into the November cold, and heads home. In the dining room, the lights flicker once, then die. Darkness, complete and immediate, swallows the mansion. The game stops mid-hand. Voices rise. Someone fumbles for matches. Gas lamps in this house were removed months ago. Edison's system was meant to replace them, not supplement them. It takes several minutes to find candles. By the time dim, wavering light returns, the moment's absurdity is clear. J. Pierpont Morgan, who controls railroads and banks in Edison's own company, who has spent thousands of dollars to become the first private citizen in New York City, with electric light cannot keep those lights burning past 11 o'clock without waking his engineer or learning to operate a coal-fired steam plant himself. This is the cost of being first. This is what private infrastructure means when it depends on human labor to remain alive. This is the moment when privilege meets its own limitations, and even the wealthiest man in America sits in darkness, waiting. Chapter 1. Who Gets to Jump the Queue? In January of 1882, William Henry Vanderbilt commissioned Thomas Edison to electrify his Fifth Avenue mansion. On the evening of the inaugural test, Vanderbilt and his family gathered to witness electricity come to life. The lights burned beautifully for 20 minutes. Then smoke appeared. Flames crawled across the picture gallery wall. The silk wallpaper, woven with metallic threads, had become a conductor. 2 wires crossed. The metal heated. The silk ignited. Edison's men shut down the system. The flames died. But Mrs. Vanderbilt had seen enough. She would not live over a boiler that could burn her home down. Within weeks, Edison's crew dismantled everything. The first private electric residence in America lasted 1 night. 3 months later, J. Pierpont Morgan made a different calculation. Morgan had financed Edison since 1878 and controlled the Edison Electric Light Company's board. In spring 1882, he announced his Madison Avenue brownstone would be electrified before his family returned from their Hudson River estate that fall. The deadline was absolute. This created a problem. Edison was building something far more ambitious, Pearl Street Station, the world's first commercial central power plant. The project had consumed 4 years and $300,000. 6 jumbo dynamos, each weighing 27 tons and producing 100 kilowatts, would serve a quarter square mile of the financial district. The planned customer base 82 businesses, including Morgan's Wall Street office. Planned opening September 4th, 1882. Morgan could wait until September and connect to Pearl Street like everyone else. Or he could commission a private system that would beat the public station by 3 months. He chose the latter. By June 8th, Morgan's house was lighted. 3 months later, Pearl Street opened, serving 82 customers with 400 lamps total. Morgan's private system would eventually power 385 lights in a single household, nearly as many as the entire public grid initially distributed to dozens of businesses. The sequence matters. Private infrastructure came first. Public followed. This was not inevitable. This was choice. That choice, repeated across wealthy homes, established electricity as something the rich enjoyed while the rest waited. 1.2 million people lived in New York in 1882. Morgan's lights glowed in June. Pearl Street lit 82 buildings in September. The majority sat in gaslight for years. Some neighborhoods waited 4 decades. Who decided this was acceptable? Who determined one man's convenience justified jumping ahead of public service? The answer is simple. The man who controlled the company building both systems. Capital didn't demonstrate the future, it purchased early access. When we celebrate Morgan as a pioneer, we forget to ask who was left sitting in the dark. Chapter 2: Who bears the cost of being first? Building a private power plant inside a residential brownstone required engineering that had never been attempted before. Morgan's cellar, which had housed his carriage horses and their feed, would now hold a coal-fired steam engine, a boiler, and 2 electric generators. The horses were moved to a nearby stable. Their displacement was permanent. Edison's installation crews arrived in the spring of 1882. They began by excavating a trench from the cellar to the main house, a channel that would carry the electrical conduits underground. The trench was lined with brick to protect the wires from moisture and ground pressure. Inside the mansion, decorator Christian Herter supervised the threading of insulated copper wires through the elaborately wood-panelled and plastered walls. These wires followed the paths where gas lines had once run, snaking up through floors and ceilings, branching into every room. New electrical fixtures replaced the old gas lamps. In some rooms, wires hung straight down from small holes in the tall ceilings, sprouting clusters of bulbs at their tips. On June 8, 1882, Sherborne Eaton, president of the Edison Electric Company, wrote to Edison, "Morgan's house was lighted up last night." The letter continued with technical notes. The light itself was satisfactory. Morgan was delighted. But the armature of one of the generators designed to power 250 lights sparked badly. It would have to be changed at once. A man named Vail took charge of the repair. Morgan, Eaton noted, was pleased with everything except Herter's fixtures. By fall, the system was fully operational. 385 electric lights illuminated the mansion from top to bottom, from the servants' halls and butler's pantry, in the lower levels to the bedrooms on the upper floors. The Romanesque dining room, with its high oak panelling and 12-foot square stained glass skylight, was particularly striking. Electric lights cast a jewelled radiance through the coloured glass, creating effects that gas lamps could never achieve. But the system had limitations. The engineer who operated the cellar equipment worked from sunset to 11 o'clock at night. When his shift ended, so did the electricity. More than once, the household was plunged into darkness in the middle of a late evening card game, fumbling for candles in rooms that no longer had gas lighting as backup. And then there were the neighbours. Mrs. James Brown lived next door. Her complaints began almost immediately. The steam engine in Morgan's cellar made her entire house vibrate. The walls shook, the floors trembled. It was constant, unrelenting, maddening. Worse, the coal-burning boiler belched smoke that permeated her pantry. Her silver was tarnishing. The smell was inescapable. Morgan reassured Mrs. de Brown's husband that an expert from Edison's company would call immediately to address the problem. He promised to spare neither exertion nor expense. 3 weeks passed. No one from Edison's company appeared. Finally, Morgan wrote an indignant letter to Sherborne Eaton. "I must frankly say that I consider the whole thing an outrage to me, as well as the neighbours. I am unwilling to stand it any longer. Please let the matter have immediate attention." The solution, when it came, was elaborate. Workers underpinned the steam engine and generators with India rubber pads to absorb vibrations. They lined the stable walls with felt for additional acoustic dampening. They cushioned the entire installation with sandbags. To address the smoke problem, they dug yet another ditch across the yard, this one designed to funnel coal smoke from the steam engine into Morgan's own chimney, rather than venting it directly into the open air near Mrs. Brown's property. The modifications worked, the vibrations lessened, the smoke redirected, but they created a new problem no one had anticipated. The brick conduit running underground to the house carried not just wires, but also heat from the steam system. In winter, when snow fell, the ground above the conduit melted first, creating a warm strip of earth. Stray cats discovered it. They gathered there in great numbers, drawn to the warmth. Their yowling through the cold nights gave grounds for more complaints. Morgan's 385 lights required all of this displaced animals, dangerous installation labour, hazardous sparking machinery, neighbour disruption, environmental pollution, and unintended ecological consequences. But Morgan experienced none of these costs directly. Others absorbed them. That was the price of being first paid by everyone except the man who wanted the lights. Chapter 3. What does one household consume versus what a city shares? By fall of 1882, Morgan's mansion glowed with 385 electric lights. They burned from sunset until 11 o'clock each night, when the engineer's shift ended. Servants moved through illuminated halls. The family dined beneath the stained glass skylight, jeweled light playing across their faces. Guests marveled at the soft, steady radiance that never flickered like gas flames. It was, by any measure, a technological triumph. 3 months later, on September 4th, 1882, Thomas Edison stood in Morgan's Wall Street office and gave the signal. At Pearl Street Station, Chief Electrician John W. Lieb closed the switch. Power flowed through underground conduits to 82 customer locations across the financial district. The initial load was 400 lamps, barely more than the number burning in Morgan's single household. The arithmetic is stark. One family consumed 96% of what the entire public grid initially distributed to dozens of businesses. Morgan's private system, serving 7 people and their staff, required nearly the same electrical capacity as a public utility serving the financial heart of New York City. Pearl Street Station had cost $300,000 to build nearly $10 million in modern currency. Edison had financed much of it himself after his investors refused additional capital. The station housed 6 jumbo dynamos, each weighing 27 tons, each capable of producing 100 kilowatts of power. It employed full-time coal shovelers, engineers, and maintenance crews. It served a quarter square mile of Manhattan, and for the first 2 years of operation, it lost money. Morgan's system, by comparison, served 3,000 square feet of residential space. Its costs were absorbed into household expenses, coal deliveries, an engineer's salary, equipment maintenance. These numbers were never published. They didn't need to be. Morgan's wealth made cost irrelevant. By 1884, Pearl Street had grown to 508 customers with 10,164 lamps. It finally turned profitable. Morgan's household still burned 385 lights, now representing 3.8% of the total lamps serving 0.2% of the customers. The disparity had merely scaled. Light bulbs themselves cost $1 each, a significant expense in the 1880s. The first electric bill ever issued went to the Ansonia Brass and Copper Company on January 18, 1883, for $50.44. For most businesses, this was a meaningful operating cost that had to be justified against the price of gas lighting. For Morgan, it was invisible. The real cost appeared in fall of 1883, when Edward H. Johnson came to inspect the system. Johnson was vice president of the Edison Electric Light Company. He lived nearby, at 139 East 36th Street, in a house that would soon have its own isolated electrical plant. Johnson was not happy about making the visit. As he later wrote, in a fledgling industry desperate for capital and credibility, he had little choice. Morgan's firm was a significant power on Wall Street. Johnson spent hours examining the installation. He checked the generators, inspected the wiring, tested the voltage. Afterward, he sat down with Morgan to deliver his assessment. After thoroughly canvassing the lighting of the house, Johnson said, he found the system already outmoded. Technology was advancing that quickly. Electric light engineering was evolving month by month, and what had been cutting edge in June of 1882 was obsolete by fall of 1883. Morgan asked what Johnson thought should be done. Johnson asked if Morgan wanted an honest and candid reply. Morgan said he did. If it was my own, Johnson said, I would throw the whole damn thing into the street. Morgan did not throw it into the street. Instead, he had Edison's company completely reinstall the system with upgraded equipment. The cost is unknown. No records of it survive in accessible archives. When the work was complete, Morgan held a large reception to showcase the new installation. The message was clear. The system had failed. Morgan had the resources to fix it, and he would celebrate the fix as if it were another triumph. Public customers could not demand this. If Pearl Street's dynamos broke down, businesses sat in darkness until repairs were made. But Morgan's private system could fail, be rebuilt, and become an occasion for a party. This is what it meant to own infrastructure rather than depend on it. Chapter 4. When does private privilege become private burden? By 1884, Pearl Street Station had achieved something Morgan's private system never could: profitability through scale. 508 customers sharing 10,164 lamps meant infrastructure costs spread across hundreds of paying accounts. Each new connection made the system more economical. Morgan's system, by contrast, grew more expensive every year. Coal deliveries continued. The engineer's salary remained fixed. Equipment aged and required replacement. The economic calculation was reversing. Initially, private generation had meant independence from an unproven technology. Morgan's lights burned reliably while Pearl Street was still under construction. But by the mid-1880s, that advantage had disappeared. Pearl Street was proven, reliable, and expanding. Connecting to the grid now cost less than operating a personal power plant. The question was no longer whether public electricity worked. The question was why anyone would pay premium prices for isolation. The answer, for most wealthy homes, was that they wouldn't. Private systems began disappearing not because they failed technically, but because they failed economically. It was simply irrational to maintain generators when grid service offered superior reliability at lower cost. The shift accelerated through what became known as the War of Currents. Edison's direct current system had a fundamental limitation. Electricity could travel only about half a mile from the generation point before voltage drop made it unusable. This meant central stations needed to be close to their customers. Westinghouse's alternating current system, using transformers developed by Nikola Tesla, could transmit power over much greater distances. By 1888, Tesla had unveiled an AC motor. Westinghouse purchased all of Tesla's patents. The economic advantage was overwhelming. Larger plants could serve wider areas. Infrastructure costs dropped further. Edison fought back with a public fear campaign, branding AC as the death current and staging demonstrations of its dangers. It didn't work. The economics were too compelling. AC won. In 1890, fire broke out at Pearl Street Station. Flames destroyed all but one of the jumbo dynamos. Edison's team worked around the clock for 11 days to restore service. They succeeded. But the rebuilt station was already obsolete. Engineers had designed power plants of much greater size intended to serve larger areas. In 1895, Pearl Street was decommissioned. The world's first commercial central station, which had changed everything, was no longer needed. But the industry's transformation had begun 3 years earlier. On February 5th, 1892, Pierpont Morgan engineered a merger between Edison General Electric and the Thomson Houston Electric Company to form General Electric. Edison learned about it from reporters. He had no advance notice. Morgan's reasoning was coldly economic. Thomson Houston had almost twice the profits due to superior management. Morgan decided the merged firm would be run by Thomson Houston executives. Worse, he erased Edison's name. The new company was called simply General Electric. Edison was bitter. He vowed to do something so much bigger that people would forget his name had ever been connected with anything electrical. That never happened. But Morgan had made his point. The electric industry was no longer about inventors. It was about capital, and capital wanted consolidation. Through the 1890s and into the 1900s, investor Anthony N. Brady acquired utility franchises across New York. Engineer Thomas E. Murray rationalized the conflicting and overlapping systems. The goal was building a customer base of sufficient potential income to amortize the expense of large-scale construction. Small private systems, including those in wealthy homes, were absorbed into corporate utilities. Morgan's mansion almost certainly connected to the grid during this period, though the exact date is not recorded. The man who had commissioned private infrastructure in 1882 now controlled the corporate monopolies that made private infrastructure obsolete. He had profited twice, first by accessing electricity years before public service, then by consolidating that public service into companies he owned. Private privilege hadn't disappeared. It had evolved into corporate power, and the pattern would repeat. Chapter 5. What patterns persist when we forget what we celebrate? In 1928, Morgan's mansion at 219 Madison Avenue was demolished to make way for the Morgan Library Annex. The private electric system, once cutting-edge, then obsolete, then irrelevant, disappeared into rubble. What remained was the story we prefer to tell. Visionary financier partners with genius inventor. Together, they bring light to America. We celebrate pioneers. We forget who sat in darkness while they glowed. The mathematics of exclusion are precise. Morgan's lights burned in June of 1882. Pearl Street opened in September, serving 82 businesses with 400 lamps. By the 1920s, 40 years later, buildings like 97 Orchard Street still had no electricity. Improved gas lighting worked well enough for working families. The technology to install electric lines remained expensive. Profit margins were too slim. Private utilities saw no reason to serve neighborhoods that couldn't pay premium rates. In 1935, President Franklin Roosevelt signed the Rural Electrification Act. The reason was simple: private electric companies claimed rural areas were too expensive to serve. The same logic that had left urban working-class neighborhoods in gaslight for decades now applied to farms and small towns across America. Federal intervention was required. Government stepped in where private profit failed. Transmission lines were built to remote areas that corporations had refused to electrify. The pattern persists. Today, fiber broadband flows to affluent suburbs years before urban cores or rural communities receive service. Electric vehicle charging stations cluster in wealthy neighborhoods. Home solar systems are adopted early by those with capital to invest. Working-class families often pay higher rates per kilowatt-hour than their wealthier neighbors. Each generation rediscovers the same truth: infrastructure follows money, not need. We call this innovation. We celebrate early adopters as pioneers. We rarely ask who was excluded while they enjoyed exclusive access. Morgan's 385 lights are remembered as a triumph of American ingenuity. Mrs. Brown's tarnished silver is forgotten. The displaced horses are footnotes. The 40-year gap between elite access and working-class service is erased from the story we tell ourselves about progress. Con Edison, the direct descendant of Edison's electric illuminating company, still serves New York. General Electric, formed when Morgan erased Edison's name from the company, remains one of the world's largest corporations. A commemorative plaque marks the site where Pearl Street Station once stood. The plaque celebrates the dawn of the electric age. It does not mention that 1.2 million people lived in New York when Pearl Street opened. It does not count how many of them sat in gaslight, waiting their turn. Infrastructure is not neutral. It embodies choices about who gets served first, who pays the costs, and who waits. Morgan's private system made those choices explicit. One family consumed what dozens shared. The wealthy enjoyed electricity while the majority waited decades. When we forget this, we repeat it. And somewhere tonight, someone sits in darkness, waiting for infrastructure that will not arrive until serving them becomes profitable enough to justify the investment.